Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This bigger show is about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Chapelwaite. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we open, and it's kind of an interesting opening where we get like a younger Philip and Robert, and we see that Silence Boone is going through the same thing, like the illness or whatever it is, the quote-unquote illness is affecting her to the point she pulls out a tooth and then the worm, and then she just kind of goes on like, because it's interesting, because I'm curious like why it decides to strike them at what certain ages. Like, is it a consistent age or is it just all over the place? Because she got struck with it then, obviously, like Robert got struck with it much later in life, but who knows, because like the age that Stephen was at the time could have been around the same age that Robert and Philip kind of were, but it's because he was probably about his own son's age, Tane's age, when his dad went crazy, you know, with Charles' case. I don't know if I said Stephen or just Charles. Regardless, so that's an interesting opening, being like, yep. So it brings up all those questions, but obviously you have Charles kind of waking up in the aftermath of everything. Last episode is like, right, he's been sleeping till midday, and I think it speaks volumes that the one that checks on him is Honor, because it's like, oh, Loa and Tane are doing their lessons, but also it's like Loa's still upset about yesterday. He's like, what I did was indefensible. She's like, you don't have to explain yourself to me, father. But it's like, she's the oldest, so she's trying to pretend like she's okay because she needs to be, because it's like, right, it's my responsibility to make sure everyone's okay, even dad. You know, it's like, even she was terrified of seeing, like, she's never seen her dad like that. And her justification for it later on is like, right, my dad's not crazy, and she has to say that because there is some part of her that believes he is. She's worried that he might be, but it's also like, we need you to be okay. Like, without, like, if you go crazy and we lose you, we have no one in this world. Like, they already lost their mom. They can't go through losing their dad too, especially if he's going crazy on top of all of that. And so that's why I think she's trying to defend him a little bit more than Loa is. Loa's just kind of like, she's always seen what was there buried underneath. I think, like, maybe it's just Honor she's seen it as well, but maybe she kept pushing it away, whereas, like, Loa's always seen her father kind of seen through him a little bit. So maybe that's what kind of plays into that a little bit. But it's also, like, for Honor, it's like she also chalks it up to, like, my father, he hasn't grieved. Like, they've grieved, but, like, he had to kind of stay strong for their sake, so he's never really taken time to really grieve their mother's loss. But Rebecca comes in to talk to him. She's like, should I be worried that you could be putting me or the children in danger? He's like, honestly, I can't answer that. And he opens up about a circumstance about what he learned when he visited Dr. Frost, and, you know, about his circumstances, about his father trying to murder him. So it's like, he's worried that, like, obviously, like, what's afflicting him, what scares him the most is, like, he doesn't ever want his children to look at him the way he looked at his father, where it's like, here's the man that I knew, but it sounded like my father, it moved like my father, but there was no trace of the man that I loved. He never wants his children to look at him like that, but he also doesn't want to be the reason why they end up like him too, because, like, what he has, once again, it's not just like a male thing. Like, we see it with Silence, so that means, you know, he's worried about Tane, but also that with it being the hereditary thing it is, that means Loa and Honor are just as much predisposed to it as well. So for him, he's going to go to Dr. Frost because it's like, because she was like, but, you know, Rebecca's like, anyone who goes to that island doesn't come back. But for him, it's like, I don't know what else to do. And he's like, I'm sorry I'm putting on such a large burden on you, but I need to do this to make sure I never, like, hurt my children, or they don't end up that way up in the future themselves. But it's like, he feels like this is the only option. But then Tane finds a little door, because we keep seeing it in the opening. It's like a little staircase or whatever. I took that as kind of like being the boat, like kind of like a boat, because it goes like, because it almost looks like the doorway down to the basement where, like, Marcella fell and quote unquote broke her back, and then it goes up to the picture of Philip. Like, obviously that's them kind of messing, you know, like reshaping the house just to fit the purposes of, like, the opening crawl, but part of me was like wondering if that's what that was supposed to be, but I'm like, no, I think it is supposed to be like the basement area. But regardless, they end up finding like a tunnel system that kind of goes throughout the house, and he kind of investigates it on his own. And there he finds some dead rats and even some skeletons. Okay, so that's why you haven't been able to find the bodies. He's brought them here and disposed of them. They're picked clean, so you're like, okay, so he's eating them. And then there's also the rats. That's also why the guy, like, yes, he's not crazy, like, and once again, I love how this show is played, because at first you're thinking the entire time, like, oh, he's crazy, that's why he's hearing rats that aren't there. It's like, no, the rats are there. The reason the guy couldn't find the bodies is because Steven's been holding them and feeding on them the entire time. Because you do notice too, like, none of the, like, the rats are just bled out. There's just, like, they're dead, but there's no, like, oh, like, because if he was cooking them, there'd be nothing left. But, like, the fact is that, because I don't know whether he was, like, actually, I'd assume he was feeding on the bodies as well. Like, once again, that's where I figured the whole blood thing. That was, like, because thought that was so interesting to go to such extremes, but it's like, right, it's a faster way of getting a crap ton of blood, just slicing their throats. But we see, like I said, there's large-scale bones, so it has to be like, that's how he's disposing of the bodies. Must be like waiting until no one's in the house, and then he's like burning them, because there is a fireplace. Because it looked like the bones were in a fireplace. And it's like, was it the worm doth corrupt? And so now Steven, you know, Charles, I keep doing that. Charles, you know, talks to Rebecca, and it's like on the other side, and she's like, wait, it's like, yeah, there's like a whole room here, which we saw that room earlier. I guess that's also why the pertinence of it too, like, it is significant to, well, not just Stephen, but Philip as well, because that's where Philip's mom, like, resided. That room was, like, I guess, like, maybe, like, after she got sick or whatever, they, like, or died, like, they, like, boarded up that room and just sealed it all. So there's that, but now Charles is like, right, that SOB has been messing with me the entire time. He gets Rebecca, he's like, go get Abel and don't stop. It's like, I'm gonna hunt that SOB down for, you know, threatening me and my family. It's like, yeah, the entire time you've been thinking you're going crazy, which there is a level to that. Like, you are, it doesn't change the fact is of like, yeah, my cousin has been messing with me, he actually is alive, but it also doesn't explain all the worms and weird stuff you've seen. So both, once again, it's like, you can be crazy, but also right at the same time. It doesn't take away, even being right doesn't take away the fact that you are crazy. So there's a lot happening at once, but at the very least, he can focus, because at least Steven's something he can immediately do is something tangible, whereas the rest is like stuff in his mind. He'd have to go away. So I think at the very least, he wants to take care of his children and make sure they're okay by taking care of Steven. But then it begs the question, if he takes care of Steven, will he think like, well, now that Steven's taking care of everything's going to be fine, even though it won't be? Which obviously, like, there's a lot going on in town. First and foremost, obviously, Susan's mother being like, was it Rose being like, I know it was Steven behind my child's death. She even said it herself, but the constable's like, Steven's dead, and she slaps him, because it's like, why aren't you searching Chapelwaite, like turning it inside and out, which is like, this be the interesting time for you to do that, considering the fact is that you, considering everything that's going down at Chapelwaite right now. Like, the reason why Steven isn't inviting other people, because it's like, no. I'm not going to give the entire town an excuse to come to my place, burn it to the ground, and also potentially put me and my children to the fire, because no matter what Steven's up to, even if he is the one solely behind it, they'll blame me like, oh, we were in on it together. So it is probably best to handle this in-house, because, you know, even a constable's not on your side. Like, no, the only person in town that's legitimately on your side, which, once again, even her reasoning isn't completely altruistic, but she's still there helping regardless, even though she's kind of getting something out of it with the stories, is Rebecca, you know? So, and there's also Faith, it turns out, lady with no name that visited Tane the last episode, turns out her and Faith were part of the same cult. The people that Faith was running from, because we learned that in episode 2 about she's running from people. Now it also explains like why that lady was outside her room. It's like, oh yeah, we've tracked you down, we found you. As later on they refer to themselves as the Promised. So like this cult found her, and it's like, right, it's forever. Like, you know, you gave your blood, so it's like, yeah. Like, you know, invite your Martin, you know, the minister, and even your baby, like, you know, they're just as much welcome. And she comes to warn them, because she's like, oh, you don't have to worry about it. She's like, Martin, they found me. They know about you, and they know about the baby. So she's like, let's go. And he's like, but then, like, he's kind of reluctant. Like, he keeps saying, like, no, saying basically like, oh, leaving my wife is complicated. I'm like, why is it complicated? But it's like, right, because she was the mother of your children, and no matter what, you're going to feel bad leaving her behind. Yes, you have your issues and everything with her father, but it's still like, this is your wife, and she's the mother of your now deceased, like, twins. And so it's like, I think all of that is still the thing of like, he feels obligated, and not just obligated, but he wants to be there for her, because it's like, right, the pain she's going through, like, he knows she shouldn't have to go through that alone. And so, because she's like, sometimes I worry that they've kind of strayed from your heart, which he was like, never. And she's like, sometimes I wonder if I've kind of strayed from your heart. And he was like, no, you know, you should just go home and rest. But it's like, so I'm thinking he's backing out of like going with Faith, even though he promised. She was even like, if you are not going to leave your wife, tell me so I can get our child out of here. Because at the end of the day, Philip doesn't Martin doesn't 100% know what he wants. So I think he kind of made his choice this episode. We'll see if he kind of backpedals and tries to like string Faith along by like, no, just give me some time to figure things out, or whether it legitimately will be like, no, I'm going to stay with my wife thing. But by then it might be a little too late, because his cult isn't the type to give up. You know, it's like, oh, once you're in, you're in. Which I love that. Like, so much stuff has been doing. I mean, it's not like this cult stuff is new, but I feel like it's, I mean, because I also don't know when this story was written, you know, because once again, it also comes down to like how faithful of an adaptation this is to like the original short story of Jerusalem's Lot. Hell, even what short story means in a grand concept of thing, like what I mean lengthwise. But regardless, just like cults are like, obviously like they've always been there throughout history, so it's not like it's, but to me it just feels like so much stuff has so much cult related stuff. But it's also because I've been diving into it, because I've been like, there's a set of video games called like Trails from Zero or Trails to Zero, depending on what version of the game you get, that deals with like a religious cult. So that's kind of in my general zeitgeist right now, thinking about. But also just like there's plenty of other things that have like cult like elements to it that I'm like, you know, The Walking Dead, for example, kind of has like a religious cult type of group as well. So it's like, you know, it's just like there's so many of those around. So I was actually kind of surprised to find out. But also like to know, like, I mean, they've kind of been introducing it slowly with that lady who has no name, the main like one who kind of speaks for the promised, that this whole cult and everything, and like Jacob, which when I think, oh, Jacob and a cult, I think of makes me think of Lost, because there was a Jacob in that regard as well. So I'm like, I wonder if there's some parallels kind of drawn from that. We'll get to that soon enough, my thoughts on that. But while Stephen is waiting to hunt, God, I keep doing it again. While Charles is waiting to hunt Stephen, a lot of other stuff is going down. Abel shows up. He's meant to kind of help Honor protect Loa and Tane, and obviously Abel kind of finally tells Honor why he was kind of, he likes her, but it's like, right, I'm black, I can't be kissing a white girl. And she's like, but I'm not white. He's like, you're white enough for me to still get killed for it. You know, and it's like, that is kind of a shame, because I thought it was going to be like I was kind of in a general area to a certain extent. I thought it was more so like, right, they're both minorities. So it's like, oh, he's black, she's an islander. Because I don't know if they ever specify like where they're from specifically. Maybe they did. But it's like, right, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. She's not white, so, you know. But that's the thing of, like, considering what the town is, like, you'd be doubly screwed either way if they were a couple, because, like, they already both get crap for being who they are, so you being together would create even more of a stir. But because I don't think the town would justify by being like, oh, we're going to get you for going. It's like, no, like, she would just be on just as much of the chopping block as he would. But I can understand his position of like, right, I can't get with no, like, even if you're not white, you're white enough complexion wise that it's like, you're lighter than me. So that's why, like, it can't be anything between us. So, but he also kind of says like, right, he is like, is your father like for real about this whole Stephen thing? And she's like, yeah, there's the tunnels. You saw him. He's like, but I knew Philip and Stephen. They were normal men until they weren't. Your father, he's carrying a burn. She's like, shut up. Like, my father isn't crazy. He's like, right, I'm sorry. But then Loa's kind of like, yeah, father is sick. Even Tane being like, is dad sick? And, you know, Honor having to be the one to kind of be like, no, even though she kind of feels it to some extent. At the same time, in town, you had Rebecca coming to track down the constable, but ends up finding his wife Mary with someone else, and it's not Steven, it's Philip. I'm like, okay, so now we in this wheelhouse of like, well then who the hell is, like, can we discount anybody being alive? Like Marcella, Silence, are they still alive? God, it even begs the question, like, is Robert, Charles' father, alive? You know, it begs a lot of those questions as well. So, but she sees him and she chases after him, and then the moment he turns and he has a fangs, I'm like, so are we dealing with vampires? And then later on, when the constable is checking his wife, and that we see the two punctures, I'm like, oh, we are straight up dealing with vampires. But it seems like we're going about vampirism a little bit differently, because it seems like this all relates to the worm. So I guess the worm is kind of like almost like like whether it's like I said, like there is one giant worm that's like the spawn of that spawned all these little worms that act very parasitic, but that parasitic ism acts as the vampirism. I mean, because once again, just like different things will interpret vampirism as kind of like a sickness and a virus. It's, you know, very much like zombieism in that regard. So like, I'm just curious to know, like, is that, I mean, because like it makes sense to, you know, on like a weird supernatural sense, like, you know, tying like worms and the undead, because they might not necessarily go down the vampirism route. There might be like, it might be kind of like something like Hemlock Grove, which have Upiers, which are kind of like vampires, but that's kind of like a whole other beast in its own right. Like, they're similar but different. So maybe it's kind of something of a similar vein in this case, of just like, there's similar cases, but they're not necessarily vampires. I mean, they are doing the whole waiting until nighttime thing, so we'll have to wait and see, like, do they get affected like traditional vampires, like daylight and stuff like that. But like I said, it just seems like they're shifting, like, you know, the vampiric like mythology with this whole worm situation. So we'll ultimately see kind of how that ends up playing out. But yeah, Rebecca goes back and warns her mom, who's like, yeah, the only person staying here is Fate, which is interesting, because I'm wondering, does Fate like know, like hearing that, like, oh, Philip's back, it's like, you don't see her necessarily freaking like, oh my god, he's back. It's just kind of like, she's just in the background comments like, well, she was a part of the cult, so she probably knows what this is all about, probably trying not to let on that she knows what this is all about. Because I think she even said, like, you know, in, was it episode 2 or whatever, like when her child was born, it's like, I think she would kind of almost seem like it was punishment, like, because it's like she did worship something else, so like for her baby to end up the way it did, it's like almost like, because that was also something like Mary had said, like, oh yeah, I turned away from the light, you know, from him, and it's like, from whose love? It's like God's love. I turned away from the light, and now I'm kind of being submitted to the darkness because she's being turned. So at least that's what it's kind of implying. Not unless it's not even like a turn situation, because it might just be like a compulsion, like, you know, like the promise, they might be compelled, or whether that's 100% in their free will, or whether they have just been succumbed to it, like how Faith might have broken said compulsion. There's many different questions that need to be answered about that. But at the same time, you know, while he's in wait, Charles starts seeing the worms again, but then, you know, he hears someone coming, like, afterwards, and kind of sounds off. It's like, oh, these weren't real. Once again, just because you're right about the Steven thing doesn't make you any less crazy. Not unless that's like a byproduct, being like, oh, you've been chosen by the... Who knows? But Steven at the same time starts talking to Loa, because it's like, oh, you remind me of my daughter, and he starts talking about like, oh, I know, you know, it's like, oh, your mom, and she's like, had. He's like, no, have, like, because you knew my mom. It's like, no, I know your mom, and it's like, I can let you see her again. It's like, is that kind of like, oh, like once you join the dark side, like, you know, death means nothing, you know, there's no such thing as death anymore. We have this newfound immortality, so it's like, we can't, I mean, it'd be a little difficult to do considering, like, they got rid of their mother's body, but I think it's just the promise of, like, right, you can see her, he's even the one that gave her the necklace back. Once again, it's kind of trying to draw that entire family back over, because it's like, they're boons at heart, so it's like, they probably don't care as much for their mother, but it's like, because they are boons, because they are Charles's children, like, that's what matters the most. So we'll see. But the moment Charles Charles shows up, and he's just kind of like, Steven, like, why'd you draw me here? He was kind of like, find the book. That's still a part of this. I'm like, once again, I keep thinking, like, the Book of the Dead, or like, is that where we're going with this? But Charles shoots Steven, and it's like him and Abel are there both to see Steven get up and walk it off. So I was like, what the hell? And now it's like, okay, now they all know that it's like, wait, what is this? What's going on here? And so it's a conversation about it's not just Steven that's alive, it's Philip as well. Once again, who else besides him? And so Steven is Charles. I keep doing that. I'm so sorry. Charles keeps asking Loa, like, what did he talk to you about? Like, tell me, like, because it's like, you know. But Loa won't say anything because, like, I think it's just because she doesn't trust her dad. But also, it's like now knowing, like, right, if I tell you about it, then maybe I won't have the chance to see Mom again. Like, you know, because she's sad and angry because she doesn't want to be here. She's angry at her dad because she can also tell, like, he's sick, and she's like, I think she loves her dad, but I think it is just kind of like that anger is kind of blinding her a little bit right now. And she's just sad because, like, you know, it's like having lost her mom and everything. So it's like maybe the moment Charles opens up more about his childhood in front of them, instead of it just being Rebecca that knows, maybe once they all know, maybe that'll ease things. I don't know. But yeah, the promise showed up, and they're just kind of like, oh yeah, Jacob wants to see some, like, so Jacob is the Dracula in this situation, I'm assuming, but more in the religious sense of kind of like, oh, like Jacob, our shepherd, essentially. And it's like, oh, the worm doth corrupt, and one lady slit her throat in front of everybody. And it's like, yeah, he wants to meet you. Your entire family's pretty, and like, yeah, the whole point is to drag them all down. So it's like, yeah, Jacob wants to see you tomorrow. So that's definitely really, really interesting that this is all going down. I thought that was this was just a great episode with just kind of like all the answers we've been getting. So there's still some questions like I've kind of brought up during this, but I'm really excited to see where all this ends up taking us. Once again, you're going to want to keep this mad quiet from the rest of the town. I mean, the constable now knows, like, oh, Philip's alive, so there's a chance Steven might be, so it adds validity to what Susan said to Rose. But also, once again, it's like, can we really, like, does that mean Susan's body would probably have to be checked too? Because like I said, I'd assume it's just a Boone thing, but once again, we don't know, like, the bite marks, whether that's like traditional, like, oh, you're my servant, compulsion type of thing, or is that like, oh, your blood's been drawn, you're going to be turned. Like, once again, we don't know, like, the quote-unquote vampiric rules. Once again, I'm calling them quote-unquote vampires because they might not go down that right. They might kind of do like a Walking Dead and never use the word vampire, just like The Walking Dead never uses the word zombie. They just use other names for it. Like, every group has their own different names for it. But regardless, that's definitely going to be interesting to see where this all ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.